Anywho, so we're moving on now to Bart Ehrman's Love Thy Neighbor, kind of a study of what a lot of folks thought of as the unique contribution to Christianity to the world, which is a sort of altruistic, truly altruistic version of love in which the neighbor is considered even above the self. The idea, from Deuteronomy of, love thy neighbor and the golden rule, which is basically treat others as you would like to be treated. So Jesus' adoption of that would not have been unusual in his context. What was unusual was this beyond loving the neighbor, or what seemed beyond loving the neighbor, which is loving the enemy. Depending on how the enemy is defined, we can consider this, I don't know, an innovation or an abomination. Part of what Ehrman is arguing is that to most people to this day, the idea of loving the enemy, whatever lip service it's given, is an abomination. And it would have
Hmm.
been an abomination to, most of the Greek philosophers and Jewish thinkers of Jesus's day, who we're going to be talking about soon. But it's really highly controversial as to, to what extent, Jesus really encouraged this, or what extent or what extremes this rule was meant to be thought in. Like, could you really even do this? So it's, one way of defining it is like not love somebody who you can even be in reciprocal relationship with, which is the, sort of transactional love that most of us are, aware of. And even if we aren't aware of it, it's usually kind of the hidden motivation behind a lot of what we do. So rarely do we truly love with completely no expectations for reciprocation of any kind.
Hmm.
Nothing is being transacted at all, or whatever. Defined as enemy, it doesn't need to be somebody who's actively against you. It just means to somebody who is not a part of your family, isn't in any kind of reciprocal relation or transactional relation with you, where they could benefit you in any way. So it doesn't need to be, somebody actively trying to harm you.
Hmm.
Although, like in the most extreme cases, it could be.
The sense that anyone should help anonymous strangers in faraway places was simply not part of the moral equation. And my argument in the book is that the impulse to help strangers in need is embedded in our Western moral conscience because of the teachings of Jesus. Jesus universalized this idea, this obligation. Um, and the kind of love is not strictly a feeling or emotion, it is directed toward the good of others, even at a cost to oneself. And so all these passages, point to a very Christ-centric, view of living, and was pretty radical, I guess, in that day.
It's radical today, I think, and I don't
Yeah,
think
that's true.
anybody follows it, including me. So,
In this chapter, the author explores whether pure altruism, acting entirely for others with zero benefit to oneself, actually exists, contrasting it with egoism or self interest. While some philosophers argue that all human actions are ultimately driven by self serving motives, biology shows that an instinct to help others at a personal cost is actually deeply rooted in our DNA to help our descendants survive. The author suggests that human behavior is almost always driven by a mix of both selfless and selfish motivations, meaning actions can still be genuinely altruistic, even if they involve some self interest. Ultimately, just as a touch of empathy doesn't erase self interest, having mixed motives doesn't mean true altruism fails to exist.
this is, I think, where some of Ehrman's history as a debater really comes in handy, because he's already anticipated all the possible objections to the idea of altruism, to live out a theology of service to, another or the other or whatever. And when, most people post objections to this kind of a move, it usually comes down to one in one form of another. your motivation isn't really altruistic because you're getting something out of it. And it, just to get across the point that that Bart Ehrman does, that doesn't really matter. Like that's fine.
Mm,
Like if there are
mm,
mixed motives, it doesn't totally erase the fact that a part of the one of the motives, at any rate, might also be a sort of altruistic one. This means that one of your motives is unmotivated. In other words, it doesn't contain anything compelling you relative to yourself. So it would have to be something that motivates you that is beyond yourself, which is the other themselves, and care and concern for them. And
mm.
so for example, somebody would think a lot of times that you have a kind of altruistic love to serve your family or whatever, because oftentimes having children is like not a benefit to your own health really. So but or your own happiness in terms of like being able to afford whatever, the great
Yeah,
vacation and all. There's like a lot of sacrifice involved in it.
yeah,
So the idea always comes down to whatever the sacrifice is, you're still benefiting from it. So, like
yeah,
a classic example would be like, because they'll take care of you later or something like that. So it's like, you're gonna have this like this turn back and forth. Of course, there's no guarantee that they're going to take care of you later for a lot of
right.
reasons. I mean, one, they might not survive. Two, they might not turn out to be in a position to be able to do that. Three, they might just not care to do that. Who knows? Like, there's really
Yeah,
no guarantee.
yeah,
And the fact that part of what we do when we do something, I think that can be rightly considered altruistic, including with our families, is we invest in a way that we just don't know if we're going to get the return or
yeah,
not. And then, the second big objection is just the straight up biological objection. He brings up Dawkins, of course, you have to, selfish gene, and just says it's programmed to further its existence and
yeah,
continue. So,
yeah.
the principle of natural selection does not have an actual like selector making choices. It's just a compulsion that's programmed to survive and reproduce or whatever. That's what's
Right.
meant by the
Yeah,
selfish gene. So a family member or a tribal member or something like that would be programmed to maybe sacrifice, not because the genes, their own personal genes, are going to be passed on, because it won't. It's not a good survival strategy, but it is a good survival strategy for the group as a whole, to have
yeah.
folks that are kind of programmed to make these sacrifices of self. The next thing that people bring up is, well, like, what about people who sacrifice self for people that are not genetically related to them in any way, shape, or form, or whatever? That's one objection. Another objection would be something like the one I have, which is like, even given this programming, there seems to be some competition between our programming to survive and reproduce and our programming to sacrifice. So it would have to be some kind of a conflictual thing where you're programmed for two different things. So you're going to have to overcome, your desire to self-preserve in order to sacrifice for people who have similar genetic structures to you or whatever.
And he even mentioned, you know, someone in battle during war, someone jumping on a hand grenade to save the platoon, and so, well, that's altruistic. And he said, well, it might be, but you also have to consider, like, if I don't jump on the grenade and a lot of my platoon buddies die, then I would have to live with that, and it would be such a dishonoring thing to live with that, and maybe people knowing that I could have saved lives if I would have sacrificed my own. Like, so there's still like a
Yeah,
selfish kind of
right.
motive
That's right. Yeah.
in everything we do. And it's interesting. I early on in my, I guess my adult Christian life, if you will, like in college, I read a lot of John Piper, and his idea is like you want to seek, like when you serve others, you're also seeking something from God, which is would be like a selfish act in a sense. Like if I'm serving you, this will bring me joy because I know I'm bringing glory to God. So that seems to kind of go along with the idea of that mixture of self-centeredness, if you will, and
Yeah,
altruism.
it's always going to be
Yeah,
mixed, especially, I mean, Ehrman really
yeah,
points out over and over again that when Jesus tells his disciples, about this self-sacrificial love of the enemy or whatever, so you get it in many of the sermons, this idea of like, what good does it do you to benefit somebody who's benefiting you back? So, like, to have this
yeah,
reciprocal thing, you've already been given your reward and all that kind of stuff, or whatever. But what Ehrman says is like it does not purify the intention to the point where it's becomes altruistic to consider loving your enemy somebody who doesn't benefit you, because what Jesus then posits is he says if you love somebody who isn't able to benefit you in any way, a truly desperate position, they actually can't give anything back to you. But if you do that, your reward is in heaven. So Urban points out that there's really no escaping the sort of,
right,
now you're doing it, in the example you gave, the John Piper example, saying that, now you're doing it for the glory of God, or for,
yeah,
like you're basically building up treasure for yourself in heaven because you're doing these
right,
acts. And again, so there's no totally purified
no,
motivation. But for me, again, it's kind of like just having a start. So when people that I'm talking to about entering into some sort of service project or service work or whatever want to, get theological about it and say like, well, we're really doing this, at the soup kitchen or whatever for the, photo op, and, our church looks good, or whatever it
right,
is, like, or we
right,
get to
right,
feel good, we get to feel better than other people because we're serving them. When they really, are thoughtful about the motives of things and whatnot, I always say like that should not prevent you from doing the action, because you're going to be actually in many ways purified of a lot of your mixed intention, because however you think those things are going to go, whatever photo op you think you're going to get, it's not going to be the way you think it is. And so you're not going to get this sort of transactional, like, I did this, then I get that. I mean, especially if you're like trying to help out somebody in a truly desperate situation, there
yeah,
usually aren't any photo ops. And you usually don't really help them. They usually like wind up back on the streets or whatever. So there's like
right. Oh
really
yeah,
but to me that doesn't mean don't do it. It means that all the things that you think, all the heartwarming moments that you think you're going to have by almsgiving or whatever, you're not going to have them. It's going to be super rough. And I like Dorothy Day's quote about the ungrateful poor, like giving to the ungrateful poor or whatever. That's exactly right. Like ungrateful in the sense that they're not going to, come back and give you glory and honor because you
right,
lifted them out of a desperate situation of some kind. And that's good, because that's when the rubber hits the road and you decide, to step out in faith or not, because you're going to see right away that it's not the way it's portrayed. Uh, However charity is portrayed, that's not how it is. And so you're going to be purified a lot of those more mixed or selfish motives pretty quick. And I think we've both found that out as, having, decided to go on teaching, like full well aware that, the pay is not great, and like, you're not going to have like these movie time moments, Dead Poet Society, whatever, where your
nope,
students, in gratitude, like, I don't know, stand up and recite a poem or something, and all the rest is, you're not going to have a lot of that. You do get thank you
yeah,
notes once in a while and that kind of stuff, but
right,
you've and that's why I would guess that's at least part of why like most teachers don't make it past a few years, if that. But the idea
yeah,
then is like, whatever you thought, however, like you thought this was gonna, benefit you or your lifestyle, it doesn't. And so, you get into it, and it just becomes this opportunity to constantly walk out in faith into the darkness, and
yeah,
especially not being able to see on the face of the other, um, this reciprocal gratitude or anything. You're doing it now to me, not in a completely unmixed way, but it's very, very pure. It'll purify your motives pretty quick,
Yeah.
or else it'll just make you quit. So,
Yeah, it's true.
like I like this idea of like it doesn't need to be totally pure, but you need to do it anyways. Because if you just use it for one more reason not to do it, not to serve the other, oh, it's mixed, I'm going to get something out of it, then in the end, you're just not doing it.
Can any actions be considered purely altruistic? This involves three different but related issues: our actions, what we do; our motives, why we do them; and our sense of obligation, why we think we should do them. And I don't believe this. I'm gonna go back to John Piper,
Cool.
and
All right.
I haven't read him for years. And but anyways,
Mm,
he compared this to like, when you're doing something for your wife, you're planning a
mhm.
date.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it out of obligation, because that would just kind of tarnish your well-intentioned, plan to have
Mhm.
maybe a special date or a special outing. If you're going to do it out of obligation, it kind of ruins it all. It can't just be totally out of obligation. I don't think. I think it kind of robs
Yeah.
the good
I
deed,
think
if
that's
that makes
true.
sense.
And especially since if it is totally out of obligation, you're going to act like kind of like
Yeah,
begrudging on the date or
yeah.
whatever.
Like as a
Like as if it's a
teacher, like,
burden to
yeah.
you. Yeah. I mean,
Even as a
same thing
teacher,
with the
you're not
teacher.
gonna be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I gotta be here again, do my thing,"
Right.
and
You
the
got to,
students are gonna
yeah.
be like, "My teacher doesn't like me,"
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of
Right.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah, and at that moment you might not. So it's you can't rely on that feeling either.
right,
But the thing is like for me, it doesn't need to be totally purified of obligation
right.
either. So it's
It's a
fine if
mixture.
you do on a date sometimes because of a sense of obligation
Right,
or whatever, like a sense of duty. Eventually, but not always, you'll get this greater sense of I want to be doing this or whatever it is,
right,
but you can't rely on that, but but it'll come and it becomes a more natural thing, which kind of brings us to something that will come up later also, but just Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and
oh,
his
yeah.
idea that like you kind of form your character by what you do, so that
Yeah,
good actions will eventually flow forth from you without it having to feel like such a burden and such a
yeah.
duty. But
It's kinda like,
and you'll become the kind
yeah,
of person that likes to do sweet things for other people or
like, I
whatever.
find like it's kinda like waking up early to work out. I mean, sometimes I just do it,
Yeah, right.
but a lot of it, I do enjoy it, so it's kind of like a mixture.
That's right.
You can't expect to be motivated and wanting to do something all the time. Sometimes you just have to do it, and once you do it, you're like, "That was great." Or,
Yeah,
once you're at the gym,
yeah,
I enjoyed myself, or
yeah,
whatever, or
yeah.
something like that. So,
Yeah, and I just really appreciate again that there's no need for it to be pure joy or
yeah,
pure burden or anything. It's all of our motives are always going to be somewhat mixed. I mean, I think about as a
right.
teacher, when they not only going into work is sometimes just straight a duty thing, and that can
Yeah,
kind of save you from your own lack of motivation. But then, like when you think about, like you said, being enthusiastic towards the kids, that really difficult kid shows up to school, and he always does,
Yes,
because
he
like those
does.
kids are always at school, and
Yeah,
you have to act like you're happy to see the kid, and it's
yeah.
like, oh, you used to hear this thing, oh, kids are going to be like able to sense your disingenuity or whatever if you are faking it. That's, I mean, that's true to some degree. I guess just become a real good actor, but that is your duty to become
Yeah,
a real good actor and act like I'm
yeah,
happy to see you today.
yeah.
And that makes that makes you, I would just say, a better person, frankly. And like that, and like that's it. Like
Yeah,
because you could be kind, you could be nice when it's hard, and in
yeah,
those situations, and that's what I would call a making greater and greater capacity to love in more and more difficult situations with more and more difficult folks, and just
yeah.
whatever. Like you're expanding your capacity to love.
Okay, ancient Greek and Roman religions focus primarily on pleasing gods through prayer and offerings to ensure survival, rather than teaching people how to treat one another ethically. Because religion did not provide moral guidance, philosophers stepped in to answer how humans could achieve eudaimonia, which is happiness, right? Or,
Mhm.
yeah, a lasting sense of flourishing and true happiness. Aristotle argued that happiness requires living virtuously within a stable community, though he believed people were only obligated to help those within their close social circles. As the Roman Empire expanded and weakened these local civic ties, new philosophical movements emerged to help individuals find personal peace in a chaotic world. Epicureans sought tranquility by minimizing physical pain and removing the fear of death. Stoics taught that true happiness comes from mastering reason and remaining indifferent to external circumstances beyond one's control. And cynics advocated for abandoning all material possessions so nothing could be taken away. While Jesus later shared similar radical teachings about giving up worldly wealth, his goal differed fundamentally from these Greek thinkers. Rather than seeking self sufficient earthly happiness, Jesus instructed his followers to selflessly serve others to inherit the kingdom of God.
So the reason why Ehrman is adumbrating these various philosophical schools from ancient Greece is to basically explain why Jesus's teaching is actually different. So there's this
Yeah.
one impulse within biblical scholarship to show Jesus in his context, to show all the things that he got from his culture, all the ways in which he embodied a Jewish rabbi, all the ways in which his followers, especially those who were in the Greek speaking world, synthesized his Jewish rabbinic teachings with Greek philosophy. There's a big, push to show similarity, but what Ehrman wants to do is to show the difference. So what is the difference between Jesus' teachings? Because Ehrman asserts, and I think correctly, that Jesus is bringing something new to the table here, and that is again, again, however you want to put it, love of enemy, or this extension of altruistic love, sometimes in Greek agape love, where you lack any kind of like self-interest in your relation to the other.
And isn't like I don't know if Ehrman talked about this, but I'm just trying to think of in this time period who your enemy would be. I
Yeah.
mean, I would think is anybody outside your tribe would be a threat to you and to be not trusted. So I guess in Greek culture it'll be like the little city state or whatever. Like you could maybe trust that community because whatever you do and the good things you do will benefit the community and yourself. But then anybody outside of the gates of the city, so to speak, would be a threat and be considered an enemy. Would that be
Yeah,
accurate?
strangely, yeah, that is accurate. I mean, but I just want to put in one proviso there that Ehrman does deal with. So the idea of hospitality in Greece, as well as in
Mm,
ancient
true.
ancient Hebrew society. So let's just start with the story of Lot, and the idea with Sodom and Gomorrah, at least according to the prophets and many interpreters of that story in the rabbinic tradition, saw it as a story about a lack of hospitality. Leviticus, you treat the foreigner or the resident alien as as one of you, in your midst or whatever. And then in Greek society, that was absolutely a violation of the God's law to treat somebody outside of your tribe, a visitor, as an enemy, or to exploit them in any kind of way, or take advantage of them while they are not in their home country or whatever. So what is the difference? So we're not talking about like huge moving armies outside of your
Mm,
group.
yeah.
We're talking about people who are traveling to your land for various reasons. It would be something like they're experiencing, famine or drought in their own land, and so you're supposed to treat them kindly, which is why in the Hebrew text it's always saying, remember you were strangers in a strange land. So you need to treat strangers with hospitality and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that is a kind of perhaps interesting difference with the idea that the enemy is just anybody outside of your immediate group. What is Jesus introducing that's different? So that the emphasis on hospitality in Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cultures does not include the enemy. So we're making a distinction here.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, because like those people who are relying on your hospitality are in a position, where they can't really harm you. They're not, nobody's encouraging anybody to welcome somebody into their house, like an invading army or some sort of person who's
Hmm.
going to take something from your family or whatever. That's not the idea. But it seems very clear that, um, is Jesus going that far? It sometimes seems like he is, like actively, serving those who not only don't benefit you, but uh, could be harmful to you as well.
Jesus was teaching to love the resident alien, or at least Jewish culture would say, you know,
Yeah, that's
the
consonant with
resident
Jewish
alien.
culture for sure. Yeah.
But those outside the gate would be a different story.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they are like hostile towards you or something like that, right?
Right.
I
Right.
guess starting with the
Yeah.
Epicureans. So the idea of eudaimonia, again, you see that "you" part there, which means good in Greek, and the you could even see the word daimon there, so the spirit. So like it would be just like something that's good for your spirit, which was confused with the idea of just gluttony and licentiousness and whatever. And so Epicureans were always having to defend themselves against the charge of just being a bunch of, I don't know, hedonists, I guess would be the way to think about it. And they actually apparently lived quite meagerly because having a lot of stuff didn't necessarily bring you a lot of joy, and attachments to things didn't bring you a lot of joy. Attachments to having a lot of things, so they often lived pretty modestly, where
Yeah.
they just were trying not to attach so deeply to things. And basically, finding those things and those ways of life that had in balance a higher level of happiness than of suffering, basically. So a lot of slander against the poor old Epicureans, but
Yeah. A couple passages I highlighted. Epicureans emphatically did not condone wild living, quite the opposite. They wanted to live peaceful surroundings with others who are equally interested in reflective lives of contemplation and conversation, undisturbed by the affairs of the world. So it's very much like many of us. A lot of us, we just want to live peacefully with other people, and
yeah,
like on a political realm, people say, everyone wants to, have a good job that can meet their needs and their families, and to go home and enjoy being with family and neighbors. I mean, that's kind of like an Epicurean kind of mindset, and I think that's what most of us kind of hold to.
yeah,
You
we
know,
are. Most of us are Epicureans because we're not, looking for the wild party all the time. We're just looking to in on terms of the scale of things, like we want to tip the scale towards simplicity,
right?
happiness, yeah, and rather than complications and suffering
Yeah,
and whatever. So minimize,
yeah.
it's just a simple equation, but the important thing and the reason why it's discussed is because we're just going through to see the schools that existed at the time, and like how Jesus differs from them. So how Jesus differs from that school is that he's not talking about trying to work out some equation of relative happiness to relative
Hmm.
suffering or whatever. that's not even a part of the story, really. So, interestingly.
Well, I mean, Jesus said, like, I did not come to bring peace, but to bring a sword, kind of thing. So it just seems like Jesus even calls us to live a life that's not necessarily peaceful with other people. The most widespread moral philosophy at the time of early Christianity was Stoicism. Stoics did not think we should or could trust our senses to ascertain the truth. Perception could be deceptive. We therefore needed to use logic to understand everything around us. The goal of life is to understand what we actually can control and focus on on that. We should not worry about become distracted by, or be upset about things we cannot avoid. And I see that we also live like that too. I mean, I think it's a good coping strategy with our mental health to recognize I can't control that, but this is what I can do. You know, this is what I can control. So I think a lot of us live like Stoics as well.
Yeah, so I would say at the time of Jesus, in terms of Greek philosophy, although it was considered, and a lot of these Stoics called themselves Platonists, they were really from the Stoic school still. And the idea that influenced, I would say, Christianity the most is this logic bit. It's because the logos, that's where we get our word logic from, and just that the world is rational and that it like plays out according to the intentions of a rational mind. So that in Greek, mind is no, nous, and so like the world was designed according to some intelligent, rational plan, and it's going to play out that way. This is interesting. The it's kind of a wild combination when you think about it. The beginning of Gospel of John, talking about the logos, the word becoming flesh, the creative principle of the universe being this rational thing. And then you look at Jesus's life, and a lot of what he advises, especially as love your enemy things, does not seem to accord with the principles of rationality sometimes, because
Hmm.
rationality would be something that has got some at least mutual benefit. It does not seem an irrational. I mean, sorry, it does not seem a rational idea to put yourself in harm's way for the other in some kind of a deliberate way.
Hmm.
But I would also say that yeah, I would agree that Stoicism is probably in therapeutic culture to this day the most popular form of I don't know, even psychological therapy at this point. So
Hmm.
that the Stoic idea of apatheia, which is where we get our word apathy from, which has a negative connotation in English. So that means like not caring or something like that.
Hmm.
And it did sort of mean something like that for the Stoics, but maybe a little bit more extreme for the way it sounds to us today. It just sounds kind of extreme, like you. And but there were instances that Ehrman brings up where Stoics did seem to be pretty uncaring, which was to some degree the point. And actually, you can see a nicer version of this in modern day cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like this reframing technique.
Right.
Basically, it's Stoicism, where you're
Right.
uh, having some extreme emotion or some extreme
Anxiety.
emotional suffering of some kind,
Hmm.
and you're trying to reframe it. The most typical way of thinking about it is like, I'm seeing the world in black and white. It's like harming me emotionally to see the world that way. So I reframe it so I see the world as a little bit more complicated than myself. So the Stoic is looking to detach from that really, visceral connection to the world. So they become, that means not, patheia. And here it means like emotions. So like not having these very strong emotions, apatheia. And so like the most famous Stoic thing that I think I hear repeated the most is something like, the view of life, death, and the hereafter, this little thing is not that big of a deal. So like, we get books like don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all the small stuff, and that's just straight stoicism. Like
Hmm.
everything is little compared to the hugeness of the universe, or something like
Right.
that. And
Yeah.
the Stoic teachings about like fear of death is just like, oh yeah, it's how can it be a big deal? Because when you're dead, it's not going to matter to you one way or
Yeah.
before, or it's not going to matter to you one way or the other.
Yeah.
And then, were you worried about it when you were, before you came
Yeah.
into existence or whatever? That's the kind of thing where it's
Yeah.
all these different little thought experiments and thought procedures that are supposed to help you detach from your emotions so that you're not getting all wound up. And, emotions cause you to suffer. So they don't,
Yeah.
you're trying to reduce that kind of suffering, whether it be fear or just envy or whatever. And so that you're
Right.
just trying to learn in a very, well, what's what we're going to see with the cynics, like similar to the cynics, like not attaching to things because your attachments to things cause you to suffer. So, like, let everything,
Yeah.
whether you have it, whether you don't have it, it's a matter of it's a matter of indifference to you.
This is why over the years, many have asked whether Stoicism is fully human, where there is no passion, longing for something good. There can be no compassion. Without pathos or suffering, there can be no sympathy or empathy. Is that how we want to live? So I
Right.
guess that's more going into the extreme of like apathy of,
Yeah.
well, we
So
can't
the most,
control it. Don't worry about it,
yeah.
kind of thing. And that's, and you hear that a lot when it comes to, well, for example, what our students are going through, what a lot of immigrants are going through in this country. There is a temptation to be like, these issues are way bigger than me.
Yeah.
Kind of, I can't control, I can vote, I can write letters to my representatives, but I can't control what policies or what executive orders are happening uh, towards our immigrant neighbors. Um, but then at the same time, I'm like, well, I could do something. So
Yeah.
I look for something to do to help to combat what's going on that I disagree with, and so that kind of helps my mental health, I guess. It kind of
Yeah, for
helps
sure.
create a purpose that I'm doing something because I just don't want to throw up my
Yeah.
hands and say, well, whatever is going to happen is going
Yeah.
to happen.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that either.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you
so
notice that in your
yeah,
equation there, as you're working it out, you're not letting your emotion be your guide. So if your emotions were your guide, you might go off and do something impulsive and violent and whatever.
yeah,
But like
yeah,
you're letting your rationality be your guide. So you're trying to discern what your level of influence is, which for both of us is very little. So, but
right, right,
but like, but that doesn't mean, apatheia doesn't, it actually allows us to be more rational. So the most famous TV rationalist, the most famous Stoic of all time, of course, is Dr. Spock, the Vulcan. Who has to, make all of his
yeah,
decisions on a rational basis or whatever. That's why it's thought of as somewhat inhuman, because human beings just
mm,
cannot. We feel our way through the world. I mean, that's just is. I
yeah,
mean, this is actually the reason why Nietzsche hated the entire idea of the Stoic, just because he were like this feelingless, and he just totally like lifeless, without vitality kind of folks that just hated the world, basically, according to Nietzsche.
hmm,
But and were just scared of it and just like tried to protect themselves from themselves. But like you can see the virtue really in at least, if not entirely denying your emotions and fear and all the rest of the stuff, the least the virtue in like kind of lessening them so you can act a little bit more rationally. Not
yeah,
that not that rationality should totally blot out emotions, as in
right.
Spock's case, but like the point is like to find some kind of balance, I would assume,
Oh yeah.
something like that. So like it just, again, it kind of depends how extreme you want to go with this. So
And like I think with teaching, like we've taught our kids our ESL kids for a long time, and we know these kids have experienced or are experiencing traumatic things, and it's like I can't, like, if those things were happening to my own children, I would have a hard time functioning,
Yeah.
knowing that they're going through all this stuff. I've experienced that to some degree,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine loving my students like I love my kids.
Right.
'Cause I
Yeah.
don't think I would be able to function. I would get burned out. I have panic attack. I mean, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Right. Oh,
I
totally.
mean, you almost have to approach it, throw in a little stoicism, and just say, "This is what I can do,"
Yeah, I
and
think
not.
I think they make a distinction in the patheias. So there's apatheia, which is like having no emotion, and then there's like
um,
some approximal, I don't know, love. It depends. It's like one of these things where like, oh, there's all these different ways to define love or whatever. But like, yeah, there's all these different ways of defining the connection. So and they're a little bit arbitrary. So like, and what I say is going to, there's this modern distinction between empathy and sympathy. So supposedly sympathy is like patronizing, I guess.
oh,
Something like that. I mean, I don't know. It's one of these things. It's kind of like this stupid argument about like what the word really means. Like, of course, no word
yeah.
really means anything. It just means what we decide it does. So, so like, anyways,
Yeah, in your context and all that stuff,
it's
yeah,
that
it
all
can mean a
that. Yeah.
lot of different things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. So, and then
yeah,
we're supposed to have empathy for people instead of having um, you know, sympathy. So the prefix there, it means like the same. So this is this kind of like I'm totally in the same pathos as my students. That's why we shouldn't have sympathy for them or whatever, because then we would just be overwhelmed. And then the empathy, with that E in the front there, that would be more like a sort of like an out, having uh, or showing, I guess that's the pathos is it's coming out of us basically. It's so that we're warm and loving to the kid that drives us up a wall or whatever. You
uh,
can kind of see these distinctions between feeling nothing, feeling too much, and then maybe feeling just the right amount, and that's sort of the goal
right,
that we're working on as teachers in situations of high need, so that we
right.
we don't get overwhelmed.
All right, shall we visit the cynics? The key to happiness was to avoid mental anguish, and the only way to avoid being crushed by the loss of wealth, possessions, employment, friends, and loved ones was not to have any.
Yeah,
Focus entirely on your inner mental state. That kind of reminds me of like maybe some monks
yeah,
that,
right,
that go
exactly,
into
totally.
Greek, yeah, just give up everything and live off the land. And
Yeah,
it's funny. I know this is kind of off topic. Well, maybe not. I think I watched a documentary of a monastery on one of the Greek islands, and I mean I mean they're a monastery that rejects everything, family and possessions and whatever, and they live off the land and cultivating the ground. The people that living in this monastery, like they don't have heart disease, they don't have cancer,
yeah,
like they just die of old age, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah,
I just thought that was yeah, I thought it was an interesting documentary.
yeah, for sure.
Cool.
So yeah, having an acquisition causes us suffering. It's in many ways a
Yeah.
very sort of Buddhist sort of a teaching. The only real difference here between what Jesus seems to be preaching and what cynics are preaching is that for the cynic, there's no kingdom of God. Like the reason why you live without is because nothing has any real meaning or whatever. So there's no ultimate anything. There's just sort of like the illusion, and people suffer from the illusion that there is a greater good if you're a cynic, and it's because it causes you to do things that um, uh, don't really matter in the end. And so if you're going to really live out, it's a kind of nihilism, really. If you're going to really live this out where nothing really matters, then don't get invested in crap,
Mhm.
and just like, live as simply as possible. Um, because, yeah, cynic didn't mean quite exactly what it does now. So nowadays it means somebody who's just like, undermines everything with this kind of sardonic attitude, like, oh, that's
Hmm.
stupid and whatever, just kind of a really negative
Hmm.
person or whatever. But these folks, their idea was just that almost the same that nothing really matters, but it was a little less, I guess, sarcastic because they didn't try to live ironically, like a lot of modern day cynics do. They tried to just live out in this simple life where you act in a real way, like, yeah, all that stuff doesn't matter. So the most
Yeah.
famous cynic of all time, Diogenes, supposedly living naked in a barrel, performing bodily functions in front of everybody, and telling Alexander the Great to get out of his light. So,
When you have a lot of material possessions, I mean, it's also there's more to worry about. I think of like I buy used cars, just one because it's a lot more affordable, but two, like if I buy like a really nice new car, like I'd be nervous where I'm parking. Like if someone were to run a cart into my car, or just you know what I mean, like scratching it and bumping it, and like it's just more to stresses you out when you have the nicer things you have, if that makes
exactly.
sense.
Oh, totally. That's their
Yeah,
point. That's their exact point. If you have something,
yeah,
you try to protect it, and you
oh
suffer
yeah,
because you're trying to keep it. So then just don't bother having it in the first place, and you'll be
right.
fine.
Yeah, I think within moderation, that could it makes sense. Like, it is no wonder that New Testament scholars have sometimes argued that Jesus is best understood as a kind of Jewish cynic philosopher,
Huh.
urging his followers to escape the trappings of this material world to focus exclusively on a spiritual realm. Okay. However, Jesus did not promote an ethic designed to secure his followers' earthly happiness. He urged them to focus instead on the welfare of those in need, insisting people live not for their own comfort, but for the good of others. Loving like this, Jesus argued, was a way to inherit the kingdom of God. Somewhat ironically, it was an altruistically oriented form of deferred gratification.
Yeah, so
Right.
that is
Yeah.
the big difference right there. So there is
Mhm.
something that you're doing this for, the kingdom of God. However, it's always been my contention that whatever we think the kingdom of God is, whatever we think we're doing this for, the act of living for others actually purifies you of any I don't know, selfish kind of motives in the end. Because as Jesus, showed himself, the kingdom of God is not what you think. It's not even what apparently he thought it was. So it's not like, you're going to do these things and whatever your reward in the kingdom or your reward in heaven is like, ooh, I get all these like riches and I have my own mansion and heaven or whatever. It's not going to be like that. I mean, my speculation is that it'd be like, more opportunity for self-sacrificial love, if that is indeed the highest good. So
Mhm.
the thing is like, um, it's just not what you think it is. Although I will concede Ehrman's point that it is put that way by Jesus, like store up riches for yourself in heaven. It's put in terms of economics and this sort of transactionability. So I will admit that. I'm just saying it's not going to turn out like that, and that's part of the point of it for me too, is that it is like one of these things where whatever you think your riches in heaven are, whatever you think inheriting the kingdom is, it's not going to be like you get to stomp on your enemies and you get to like
Mhm.
be rich and powerful in some other realm, or whatever. It's nothing like that. I think that serving others has its own reward that's intrinsic to it, and that's what you
Mhm.
get. That's the reward of love. And then what do you get for that? What do you get for loving? You get more love. You so it's like
Yeah.
that's your reward. It's not what you think at first, anyway. So it's not quite so mercenary as it may sound if you just take Jesus's teachings just on straight face value.
Yeah, I think of a lot of churches today, and not all of them, like, I'm sure you've heard it said like it's kind of like a country club,
Hmm.
and it's not necessarily it's a bad thing. Why do you go to a country club? Well, a lot of times it's just to build those relationships with other people, which I guess that would be the next chapter too, when it talks
Yeah.
about friendship and stuff. But
Uh,
Um, and there is some charitable things that you do, but there isn't that radical pursuit of helping others outside of the doors of your church.
right.
And that's hard to find. It's hard to do. And so a lot of churches just kind of focus on the idea of like, pursuing your happiness through relationships, through good stewardship, of your finances and time, um, and to live, you know, rather simply, but enjoying the
Mm,
simple things in life. I mean, that's those are good things. I think it's a good life to
yeah,
pursue, but there is that. What, what did Jesus say about all this? that
right.
should that should challenge us a little bit, right? To like
Yeah,
let's think about others, you know. But I feel like that's kind of the state of a lot of churches in America is just it's just those three philosophical um, Greek philosophical schools of thought, and not necessarily what Jesus taught. It won't
yeah.
attract a lot of people, I guess, if if you're if you're
No,
a
right. Well,
yeah
that's the thing. I mean, how does Jesus make this way of life look enticing in any way, shape, or form?
yeah
So you've got to make some kind of maybe it's a bait and switch promise. I don't know, but tell people that they're going to inherit the kingdom. In their minds, they're thinking, "Ooh, power, riches, glory." But then, psych, the kingdom is a kingdom of love, and
yeah
not of acquisitions. So like you get kind of a little, I don't know, if you could really bring people in, with the idea. And I mean, this is what I've had to rely on so many years as a teacher in difficult situations. Before I was, here, teaching in refugee population, I was teaching for 13 years in Chicago public schools on the South Side in a very difficult situation as well. And a lot of times you have to kind of, imagine, a very different, set of reasons why you're doing it than maybe why you got into it in the first place. However you imagine that and why ever you thought you were getting into it in the first place. Um, certainly I never thought of money, power, whatever. I definitely probably was operating on some maybe somewhat of a simplistic idea of like inheriting the kingdom or something along those lines,
mm,
whatever that meant. I still believe that I inherit that I have, and I do, and the kingdom is all around me and all that kind of stuff. It's just not what I thought it was.
yeah
So that like loving somebody is not necessarily a warm feeling. It's opportunities to do really hard things like be kind and be calm and and considerate of another person when they're very hard to care for
mm,
because because they're so much they just propose so much instability and yeah, difficulty to like
yeah
your
yeah
own sense of how these things are supposed to go or work or whatever. Like, hey, I'm trying to give you something you need. I'm trying to teach you to read or whatever.
right
Like, why
right
wouldn't you like just let me do that? And
oh yeah
that's just not the deal, man. That's not how it is. So
it's definitely a grind at times. You don't have that Mr. Hollis opus kind of ending. It's just
or what's the
and,
Michelle Pfeiffer one, Dangerous Minds or
oh
whatever. Yeah,
that
it's just it's
yeah there's so many, and you look at some of these movies based on real life whatever, but it's very fictionalized, and oftentimes like I think Stand and Deliver, I think that teacher, well first of all he taught regular classes too, but then he happened to teach an AP class that did very well on the the state test or the district test that they gave. Um, and I think he ended up burning out, uh, get, getting out of teaching. And then I
Jaime
think,
Escalante. Yeah,
yeah, the principal of Lean on Me
yeah.
or Stand by Me, Lean on Me, Lean on
It's
Me.
Lean on Me. Yeah.
Um, like I think he ended up getting fired, which actually is not that surprising given
Yeah.
the movie.
Yeah.
He was
Right.
pretty. He was pretty. But it's yeah, one of my favorite scenes is as a teacher, like there's always There's always like a couple kids that disrupt the learning of others. And if you remember, like when he gave his first assembly speech to the school, he brought up all the misfits and stuff, and he kicked them out. He kicked them
Oh
all
yeah.
out. I don't know if
Yeah.
you remember that.
Can't do that.
And no, you can't
Yeah.
be. Where are you going to send them? It's
Right. You
like,
got to educate whoever shows up. That's for sure.
yeah, it is hard, and you're definitely not gonna. You're usually. Well, I think our parents, our families, I found are very supportive
Yeah.
and appreciative. But I
Yeah.
know a lot of times American families, the only time they get in contact with a teacher is to
Right.
complain or they have an issue with you, and that's hard because you are and you see on the media and just how you're lied about and how you're treated
Yeah.
um, on the with both sides of the media. Um,
Hmm.
saying like, "Oh, the inner cities they have bad schools and bad teachers." I'm like, I don't think that's not a fair assessment. It's
Yeah.
a lot more
No.
complicated and a lot
Yeah.
other issues outside of school that
Yeah. Yeah.
causes um, it causes low test scores. But anyways, yeah, you're definitely not thanked a lot.
Well, or even by, like it is very hard to see improvement, for example, because of all the
Yeah.
difficult things you're talking about. So you can implement a lot of the same procedures and whatever, and it becomes very as a recommended by the experts or whatever. Or you could take a suburban school and all its teachers and put it right in the middle of where we teach, and serve, a very different
Hmm.
population, and see how that goes.
Yeah.
um, and so we have this kind of thing where we have to still have still value excellence and achievement and that kind of thing, but at the same time understand that it's not going to look like that all the time,
Right. Yeah.
um, just because we're in a very different environment. Because if you think like Jaime Escalante or whoever, that it's going to be like that. In you said it. He had some very cherry picked group of kids that he,
Hmm.
really coached hard, and you can't sustain that because there's two you got two factors there that a regular public school teacher doesn't have. Like we can't just focus on our highest level kids and just
Yeah.
push them to whatever. And then we can't cherry pick so that we can not don't have to educate the ones that don't want to be educated. So it's
Right.
just, but
Yeah.
like, the thing is you could either decide then not to serve, not to do it, or you can decide to be a somewhat stable, caring presence in a very difficult environment where people are telling you to do impossible things all the time. And you're in an impossible
Mm.
situation, but you either stand in that situation and
Mm.
continue to show up, or you just say, yeah, it's an impossible situation. Screw it.
Yeah.
It's too much of a compromise. All right,
Okay.
Kev, I think that's good for this week. And I'll see you next week.
That's wonderful. I'll see you next week.